Yes, please. Yes, yes, Sarah. Yes, please. I'm right here, waiting to hear from Dr. Haile Gabriel.
Marion, I am here. I think your voice has been breaking up and you stopped somewhere, but let me start. Can you hear me? Can you confirm, please?
Yes, I do confirm that we can hear you. Welcome aboard. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Excellency Ambassador Joseph Asako, the Commissioner for the African Union, Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and Blue Economy, Honorable Modibo Keita, Minister of Development of Mali, Honorable Nkaku Kabi, Minister of Agriculture and Food Security, Excellency Professor Yasu Elias, State Minister of Agriculture, Natural Resources Development of Ethiopia. Professor Yasu, pleased to see you, and my sincere congratulations. My brother, Professor Adipala, Executive Secretary of UFORUM, my colleague Sarah, Regional Director, East and Southern Africa, IFAD, my colleague Ben Davis, Director of Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division at FAO, the participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to join this important event on promoting inclusive rural transformation in Africa, jointly organized by FAO, IFAD, and UFORUM. I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today for this important policy discussion. I want to thank UFORUM for collaborating with us in organizing this event, as well as the African Union Commission, our government counterparts and Development Academy and civil society partners who have agreed to speak on today's panels. A special thanks to IFAD for having the commitment to finance and support the generation of such an important body of evidence. FAO firmly believes that policy frameworks and planning for rural development, food security, and nutrition should promote the joint role of agriculture and social protection in the fight against poverty and hunger to support sustainable and inclusive rural transformation. Poverty and hunger are concentrated in rural areas, as you know, where livelihoods, incomes, and food security depend heavily on agriculture. Notably, about 82% of the poor live in rural areas, earning their livelihood primarily from agriculture. And despite progress made in reducing poverty and hunger in Africa over the past few decades, the number of extreme poor in sub-Saharan Africa actually has increased by about 50% in the last 25 years. Numerous drivers contribute to the lack of progress towards the achievement of the goals of ending poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, and reducing inequalities. In Africa, we have the issue of having to deal with multiple and overlapping shocks and threats. This would present Africa's context somewhat unique. Climate-related shocks, transboundary pests and diseases such as desert locust, the fall armyworm, among others, conflicts, the economic slowdowns and downturns, among others. Even before COVID-19 pandemic, there were about 250 million hungry people in Africa in 2019. COVID-19 is an additional shock, which has further compounded the problem. A second aspect that would make the African case somewhat unique is the absence of effective and adequate mechanisms to manage the impacts of those shocks. For example, African governments, with few exceptions, could not provide stimulus packages similar to what developed countries have done, mainly because of fiscal constraints. These capacities have been further dwindled because of public health emergency considerations due to COVID-19 pandemic. So COVID-19 may have added between 23 to 39 million people to the ranks of the undernourished in 2020 in sub-Saharan Africa. Agri-food, small and medium enterprises suffered the most through decreased sales, difficulty accessing raw materials and inputs, and reduced availability of workers, among others. Vulnerable groups have been disproportionately affected, including women, rural youth, smallholder farmers, pastoralists, artisanal fisherfolk, migrants, seasonal workers, and internal displaced persons. The impact of reduced incomes on food security and nutrition could be huge. There are concerns that most African economies will not be able to provide adequate post-pandemic recovery options. Recovery is likely going to be slow and uncertain because the crisis is still unfolding. The good news is that social protection is receiving more attention than ever before, having played a prominent role throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, with all countries in the region responding to the pandemic with some form of social protection measure. However, despite the good measure of social protection responses across the continent, national systems were not ready to handle a crisis of this magnitude. Despite the unprecedented number of new programs at the peak of COVID responses, only about 20% of the population were receiving any social protection support, the majority of which were temporary in nature. Additionally, prior to COVID-19, investment in social protection was not at all reflective of the level of vulnerability on the continent, at just 5.9% of the GDP, compared with, for example, the global average of 11.1%, according to the ILO 2018 report. Accelerating progress towards the achievement of SDGs on ending poverty, zero hunger, and reduced inequalities requires investments in innovation and effective multi-sectoral linkages. Prioritizing coherence between rural development and social protection policies is a necessary component of such an innovation to enhance the resilience of vulnerable sectors and segments of the population. On the one hand, ensuring that agricultural interventions reach the poorest can help to enhance economic inclusion and address structural constraints to poverty reduction by increasing access to land and water resources, inputs, financial services, advisory services, technologies, and markets. On the other hand, social protection programs in the form of cash or kind transfers and social insurance, such as health, social security, or livelihood insurance, can provide a minimum income level and protections against life cycle and other shocks that enhance the ability to manage risks and enable poor and small-scale producers to invest in diverse income-generating opportunities to achieve greater resilience in the face of future shocks. As such, coherent interventions between productive programs and social protection in a broad context of rural development can improve the situation of the most vulnerable, empowering them to increase food security and meet basic needs in a dignified manner, while maintaining social cohesion and enabling investment in productive livelihoods. It's important that social protection systems are strengthened to promote a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable pathway to rural transformation in Africa. There are ample experiences demonstrating how investment and implementation of well-designed, more inclusive, and shock-responsive social protection systems with linkages to the agricultural sector and food systems can empower people to improve their livelihoods and succeed in life. FAO continues to be committed to strengthening its support to governments in designing and implementing comprehensive policies and programs, promoting linkages between social protection, nutrition, and economic inclusion to achieve a more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems transformation. We look forward to working together with member states and partners towards a transformative change that is required to achieve accelerated growth and shared prosperity in Africa. I thank you all so much again for your participation in this session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe. We're really happy to have heard from you. And the actuality you have given this whole thing. You have said that the crisis is still unfolding. That caught my attention, but to rephrase what the other thing that you said is that the good news is that social protection is gaining more awareness than ever before. Indeed, this discussion is very timely. And according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, social protection comprises a set of policies and programs that address economic, environmental, and social vulnerabilities to food insecurity and poverty by protecting and promoting livelihoods. Indeed, you have given us hope that very soon we shall be smiling if we follow the guidance that will be picked at the end of this conference. Thank you very much. I now want to turn to Ms. Sarah Mbago Bunu, who is the Director of International Fund for Agricultural Development in East and Southern Africa Division. Ms. Sarah has over 20 years experience in the agriculture sector across Central, East, and Southern Africa. But before she comes on, oh, there she is, looking very pretty. Hello, Sarah. Just a minute. We know that this is international and some of our participants are more conversant or rather need interpretation. So please be advised that there's an interpretation icon, that is the globe. On the lower bottom section of your screen, you see a globe and click to choose the international language of your preference. For now, we only have French and English, but do let us know if you prefer another, and then our technical team here will see how to help you out so that you don't miss out on the conversation that is happening and that is likely to change our continent and beyond. But then again, this is to kindly request those who are not going to speak to please switch off your video and switch off your audio. We would love to see you, no doubt. And as soon as the numbers are a bit more, we shall ask you to switch on your video so that we take a group photo. But as of now, please, 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 it's a humble request that you switch off your video and certainly mute your microphone. All right, without further ado, over to you, Ms. Sarah Mbago Bunu, whose full profile will be put in the chat. And again, let us engage in the chat. You're welcome to put your questions and inquiries, and we shall be glad to respond to you. Thank you very much. Stay with us.
Thank you, Dr. Marion, for kicking us off and inviting a lively conversation. And it's always hard to come after Dr. Abebe, but I will try to complement as far as possible what he has said. So thank you. And I'd just like to start by doing so, Ambassador Sako, as I mentioned, Dr. Abebe, honorable ministers, professors, distinguished participants, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good afternoon and good morning. As has already been announced, my name is Sarah Mbago Bunu, the Regional Director for East and Southern Africa with the International Fund for Agricultural Development. It is my pleasure to speak at this event to share evidence on the role of social protection in rural transformation. And by rural transformation, we understand is to mean production, productivity, jobs, and off-farm transition. This forum has been organized by IFAD, FAO, and Reform on the behalf of member states and the wider development stakeholders, a real example of collaboration between Rome-based agencies. Fellow participants, according to the 2020 State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, SOFI report, 811 million people faced hunger in 2020 globally, with Africa accounting for about 282 million undernourished people. Projections confirm that about 660 million people will still face hunger globally in 2030. This will be partly due to lasting effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on global food security in actions to build sustainable food systems by all of us. Public investments and policies must be clearly pro-poor and inclusive to decrease inequality and to eliminate poverty and hunger. Investing in agriculture can effectively increase the productivity of agricultural labor and land. Linking these investments effectively with specific social protection interventions is important in achieving zero hunger. Today, crowding in investments in agriculture in rural areas is more urgent than ever. With increasing frequent and severe climatic shocks that we heard about, conflict, rising food insecurity, and the pandemic, the many other risks faced by rural people. IFAD stepped in to address this. So we have very clear examples of how we are doing this, and has built resilience of small farmers through its Rural Poor Stimulus Facility to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic. The financing went to finance projects focused on improved resilience of livelihoods of rural poor by ensuring their access to agricultural inputs, their access to disrupted consumer markets. It leveraged digital solutions for transformation and provided national governments with much needed affordable finance. IFAD approved a total of $183 million in financing for Africa, 50 projects across 28 countries. This example demonstrates how investing in productive assets supports inclusive transformation. Social protection enhances rural transformation and improves its inclusiveness, as we've heard by Dr. Bebe's presentation. But such outcomes will depend on the specific context and the combination of interventions, their characteristics, scale, and targeting rules. Types of interventions can either enhance or jeopardize social and human development outcomes, as we have seen as practitioners in many examples. So social protection is not a one-size-fits-all approach. We will deep dive into full range of social protection interventions, protective, preventative, and promotional during the course of this virtual conference. Ladies and gentlemen, IFAD's strategic framework from 2016 to 2025 has the ambition of investing in rural people to enable them to overcome poverty and achieve food security through remunerative, sustainable, and resilient livelihoods. And it reflects principles of rural social protection. IFAD's approach is three-pronged, namely, firstly, increasing the productive capacities of the rural poor, notably through off-farm employment opportunities. Secondly, increasing poor people's benefits from market participation. And thirdly, strengthening the environmental sustainability and climate resilience of the rural poor's economic activities. IFAD's investments primarily focus on creating and sustaining rural markets and value chains, and strengthening rural households' productivity and production capacity. Out of the 105 investments approved across all regions globally during the 11th replenishments of IFAD's investment, IFAD 11, more than half, 55%, have a component directly related to social protection. Almost 1/3 of IFAD 11 investments, $2.3 billion has been directed towards social protection, social assistance, social insurance, and job skill related investments. I will now briefly share with you our key takeaways from the 4 studies that we have collaborated with the FAO and with RU Forum, and which give us certain lessons. And I invite all of you to discuss them in depth in this forum. Social protection is necessary, but not sufficient for inclusive rural transformation. It can be expected to contribute when it simultaneously combines the 3 aspects: protective, preventative, and promotional, but it must be tailored to the context. Secondly, social protection programs targeted at women show greater benefits, particularly on key inclusion criteria such as child health and nutrition. These outcomes are especially important because maternal and child malnutrition perpetuate exclusion and poverty from generation to generation, undermining the capital needed to drive rural transformation as well as the inclusivity of the process. Thirdly, modest methods exist beyond cash transfers for integrated social protection and agriculture programs, such as digital agriculture input voucher programs, payment for ecosystem services, national micro and index insurance for crops and livestock, etc. Linking public expenditures in agriculture to social protection programs can enhance growth linkages and transformation, but also improve inclusiveness. And very lastly, the last 4th takeaway, but an important one, rural social protection should embrace promotional social protection interventions that goes beyond prevention and protective actions in order to stimulate transformation. Investing in promotional social protection that encourage very poor households to rebuild their productive assets and enable them to invest in agriculture to eliminate hunger and build resistance is a collective effort. This remains a critical aspect of the work being carried out by the Rome-based agencies, IFAD, FAO, and WFP, and other development stakeholders. We will continue to collectively advocate for poor investments and targeted social protection to eradicate poverty, SDG 1, and eliminate hunger, SDG 2. I will end here, and I look forward very much to the lessons, interactive discussions, and reflections we will have this afternoon. Back to you, Dr. Marian.
Wow, thank you very much. Much appreciated to hear you tell us that you actually look forward to the rest of the discussions that are going to happen here, after emphasizing to us that social protection is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Wonderful. So ladies and gentlemen, let's continue this discussion. If you have any question for the speakers we have had so far, that is Ms. Sarah Mbagubunu, who again, for those who have just joined us, is the Director of International Fund for Agricultural Development. Please post it in the chat. You have the opportunity to ask her, to put her on spot, but in relation to this, specifically in relation to this dialogue, or if you have a question for the speaker we had initially, and that was Dr. Haile Gabriel, who is the Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, let's proceed. Back here at the forum, we are going to listen to Dr. Florence Mayega Nakaiwa. I'll tell you.
Good afternoon. Apologies. It seems Marian's internet is poor. So Florence, may you come in and give remarks on behalf of the forum? Over.
Thank you very much, Alice, and thank you very much, Marion. Yeah, those are some of the challenges experienced in this day, the ones that Dr. Abebe was talking about. They continue in IT, in agriculture, and in development. So Marion, there she is.
Yes, over to you, Dr. Flores. Sorry, colleagues, there is a bit of a network issue on my end, but the technical team has given me the assurance that they're not sleeping, they're not sitting until it is sorted. But apologies for everyone I jump off. Over to you, Dr. Nakayo.
Thank you very much, Marion, for those introductory remarks. I will stand on the protocols that have been already articulated. The Ambassador, Your Excellency Ambassador Joseph Asako, AUC Commissioner in Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and the Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, Honorable Ministers and Excellencies gracing this high-level meeting, Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel, FAO Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa, our very own Ms. Sarah Mbagubunu, IFAD Regional Director for East and Southern Africa, Professor Stephen Devereaux, Co-Director Center for Social Protection, Institute of Development Studies, Dr. Benjamin Davis, Director Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division, Development Partners here present, colleagues from universities, farmer organizations, civil society, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Professor Adipala Ekwam, the Rural Forum Secretariat and the Rural Forum Fraternity, I wish to welcome and thank you all for joining us in this dissemination meeting, which is sharing evidence in favor of improved coherence between social protection, rural development policy in our quest to promote inclusive rural transformation in Africa. This meeting, which is part of the Rural Forum Triennial Conference and 7th Higher Education Week, signifies the long-standing partnerships we have between the Rural Forum network of 129 universities in 38 countries in Africa, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and the sister agencies IFAD and WFP. Our motivation as Rural Forum is the belief that the education sector has to be more connected to emerging and new challenges facing rural communities. We believe that the young people have to be part of the agricultural transformation process, cohesions of social protection and agricultural production inclusive. And this can only be achieved if we forge meaningful partnerships. The partnership that we have with the FAO gives us an opportunity to tap into the vast resource of the FAO to increase the knowledge, to increase expertise, and increase a network of opportunities for engagement. The youth resource, which Roof Forum represents, is projected to be more than 1 billion by 2050. And therefore, it is part of the Roof Forum Agriculture, Higher Education, Science and Technology Innovation Agenda, which we commonly refer to as a HESTI. At Roof Forum, we have acknowledged that holistic development is inclusive. It does not disaggregate between gender, education, race, or socioeconomic background. That is why we have expanded the scope of our programming to include refugees and displaced persons, out-of-school youth, TVETs, and with a special focus on women, not only in science, but for the development of agri-food systems. I am confident that this high-level event, which is looking at the interface between existing and new policies, provides an opportunity to delve a little bit more into the issues of policy cohesion, not only for social protection, but policy cohesion in general, more so in the face of the need to bounce back from the challenges generated by COVID-19 in all sectors across the continent, but also following on the declarations and the deliberations of the September United Nations Food Systems Summit. This meeting is an opportunity for policymakers at the highest level, together with academia, farmers, civil society, and development partners within the same space to reflect on the interconnectedness and its influence on all undertakings or policy decisions. They are not in air. They have to be grounded, so they are interconnected. Roof Forum has the capacity and will be part of the collective rural transformation process. With a strong convening power, we are confident that we can make this social cohesion policy, we can take this social cohesion policy agenda forward. We do look forward to working with all parties, with all countries, the FAO and other development partners on the African continent to take this agenda forward. I do thank you very much and wish that we discuss this in a candid and very open manner to see how we can take our continent forward. I thank you very much.
Right. Thank you too, Dr. Florence Nakaiwa, in your capacity, but also on behalf of Roof Forum, for giving us the assurance that every time we need you as Roof Forum to extend this conversation, to have us have this dialogue again on supporting or taking forward the social protection agenda, you will be present. Thank you very much. Well, if we were physical, I would have asked people to clap their hands for you or for Forum for giving us that assurance, but I am positive that that confidence helps us feel more firm in our different capacities as the stakeholders that are concerned, like you've mentioned. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we shall now move on to another equally important part of our first session. This was the opening session, and we are going to have now the official opening of this dialogue by Her Excellency Ambassador Josepha Correa Sacco, who is the Commissioner for Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union Commission. Please, once again, I request my colleagues to put the rest of her profile in the chat, but I'm happy to say that, yes, she's here, and well, over to her. Wonderful.
Ministers of Agriculture of Ethiopia, Mali, and Lesotho, Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel, FAO Assistant Director General, Accra, Ghana, Professor Adipala, Executive Secretary of Roof Forum, Uganda, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. I thank both FAO and Roof Forum for the invitation to open the high-level meeting on disseminating evidence on the coherence between social protection and protective agricultural intervention in 4 African countries, Ethiopia, Lesotho, Mali, and Zambia. I consider today's event to be extremely useful for a variety of reasons. With 58.7% of sub-Saharan population rural in 2020, Africa is still predominantly agriculture, despite the widespread urbanization taking place, and majority of rural dwellers rely on agriculture. Moreover, extreme poverty, hunger, and malnutrition in Africa are concentrated among rural households, which depend heavily on agriculture for their livelihood and food security. Agriculture and social protection are strongly linked, and particularly in rural areas in Africa, where the most vulnerable generally depend on agriculture. Through direct and indirect income effects, social protection programs can play an instrumental role in promoting agricultural development and, more broadly, economic growth. On the one hand, ensuring that agricultural intervention reach the poorest can address structural constraints to poverty reduction by increasing access to land and water resources, input, financial services, advisory services, adaptive technology, and markets. On the other hand, social protection programs provide a minimum income level that can enhance farmers' ability to manage risk and, by providing liquidity, enable poor small-scale farmers to invest in agricultural productivity and other non-farm income-generating opportunity. Emphasizing the livelihood promotion role of social protection is key for strengthening coordination between ministries charged with social protection and with agricultural development. Maximizing synergy between social protection and agriculture program can boost agricultural production and productivity, thus contributing to long-term growth and poverty reduction on the continent. The 2014 Malabo Declaration emphasizes agriculture-led growth as the engine for poverty reduction in Africa. In signing the declaration, African leaders committed to end hunger on the continent by 2025. In part by integrating social protection with measures to increase agricultural productivity and committing resources to finance the integration commitment. Accelerating progress towards rural poverty reduction and achieving Sustainable Development Goal 1.1 and 1.3 requires innovation and multi-sectoral perspective. Prioritizing coherence between rural development and social protection policy is a necessary component of such innovation, especially needed to enhance the productivity capacity of poor and vulnerable small-scale farmers. Recent declarations at the global and regional level acknowledge the role played by social protection and rural productive development in fighting poverty and eliminating hunger, especially in rural areas. However, despite the attempts made in various countries to better link the two spheres, more efforts are needed to improve coherence and achieve greater benefits for the most vulnerable households. Moreover, COVID-19 pandemic has strengthened political will for social protection and offers government and stakeholders the opportunity to strengthen social protection systems that respond to shocks. To this effect, linking social protection to productive intervention will be critical for building back better. To ensure the long-term sustainability of this program, it is important to move toward innovative financing models. Currently, most low-income countries do not have the capacity to fund their own social protection program through tax income alone, making it imperative to establish effective resource mobilization systems. The Malabo Declaration and the Agenda 2063 represent a step of this direction as it commits African governments to integrate measures for increased agricultural productivity and social protection initiative for vulnerable social groups through targeted line within national budgets. The African Union Commission is inviting partners, including the UN agency, development partners, academia, producers organizations, and other stakeholders to join efforts in supporting government to strengthen social protection system that promotes a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable pathway to structural rural transformation in Africa. At the UN Food Systems Summit that was recently held in September 2021, in which Africa presented a common position, many African countries prioritized social protection in their national pathways as part of their COVID-19 recovery plan. In line with this national effort, the African Union Commission is calling on the FAO and its partners to support government to enhance the linkage and synergy between national social protection, agri-food system, and climate change towards the achievement of resilient food security and nutrition outcome, as well as sustainable livelihoods adaptive to shocks. This will include expanding and strengthening the evidence base to develop practical approaches that inform government's policy and program. Merci beaucoup. Muito obrigada. Asante sana. Shukran.
Wonderful. Asante sana to you too, our dear Ambassador, Her Excellency, Ambassador Josepha Sako. We thank you very much for officially opening this dialogue. And at that point, I want once again to welcome everyone who has joined us from wherever you're joining us. And I'm going to request you to please switch on your video. This is the moment we don't want to miss any of you. Switch on your video to allow us to take a group photo, but also to request you that please do stay with us for the rest of this session. You have heard from Her Excellency that there is a lot we still need to discuss. For instance, she has said that more efforts are needed to improve coherence and achieve greater benefits for the more vulnerable households. Right. So there we go. Yes, videos are coming on. Thank you, David. I see David Martin. Let's have more. Okay, smile. You don't want to blame someone for not smiling when this photo goes somewhere someday. All right, Francis and colleagues back here at the technical team, please let us take these beautiful faces that are here to dialogue with us and then move to the next session. Okay, there you are. That is Moiloya. Okay, you didn't smile. All right, Francis, may I take it that you are done? I'll take it that you're through with that one. Thank you very much. We have good participation. We are close to...
We need 30 more seconds, please.
Okay. Okay. Let's keep there. Keep the smile. High-level policy dialogue smile. Francis, do let me know when you're through, please.
Marion, I'm done.
Wonderful. Thank you, Francis. And thanks to everyone who has joined us in this group photo. When we realize that the numbers are more, we shall probably call for another group photo, really for the benefit of those who have just joined us. All right, let's now move on to the next session of this dialogue. That is session 2, which is about the evidence and implications for policy makers. The evidence and implications for policymakers. Very quickly, for the benefit of anyone who might, who probably did not get a copy of the program, though I suspect that, I want to believe that somehow we all got a copy of the program, but nonetheless, overview of things and given by Dr. Benjamin Davis, whom I'll call on later. But also that will this is very, very important. Please request to the panelists here.
Good afternoon, Marion. You okay?
How do you measure the contribution to try to understand how people feel in those situations? And it's coming back to girls and women, for example, saying, you know, do we need a particular approach?
Marion, you're muted. Marion, kindly unmute.
Yes, sorry, we had a bit of interruption there. But just to pick up from where I'd left off, I was sharing that we're going to have a panel discussion and we have representation from the key countries that were part of this study. So let me at this point invite to begin with up there, like we have seen, I'm going to call upon our first speaker, who is Dr. Benjamin Davis, to give us his presentation. Dr. Benjamin Davis is the Director for Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division at the Food and Agriculture Organization. He has wide experience in social protection, social policies, and agricultural economics. Please put the rest of his bio in the chat. Over to you, Dr. Benjamin Davis, to take us to the next session. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Marion. I've shared the screen. I have my presentation up there. I hope that's okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much for the invitation. And I'm honored to be able to present really is the culmination of years of joint work by colleagues from a number of different countries, from a number of different agencies, government ministries working together to provide evidence on this important, the complementary and synergistic nature between social protection and productive interventions, not only in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Latin America. And we'll hear about Latin America just following me from Jorge. I think as we heard from my colleague Abebe, COVID-19 has really brought into perspective the importance of this policy area. We've seen it. We saw a massive increase in social protection in the region, in sub-Saharan Africa, even if much of it was of new programs of shorter or temporary duration. And as my colleague Sarah from IFAD also pointed out, we're concerned not only about protecting against the short-term welfare losses from COVID-19, but as well as building back better, using social protection systems, leveraging social protection systems for this sustainable transformation of food systems and of the rural economy. Now, I think kind of the most important insight really as to why social protection and agriculture go together is that most social protection beneficiaries are in fact small-scale agricultural producers, right? That is their livelihood for the most part. And as families and as producers, they face a whole series of barriers and constraints to developing sustainable livelihoods. And as you can see here in the slide, in terms of limited access to assets, informality of employment, limited access to modern technologies and inputs, information, services, but also low human capital, limited access to education, limited access to health insurance. And I think what's important is you can't really separate out, it's hard to differentiate or separate what happens to the family in terms of health, and if there's a sickness in the family and the impact that has on its productive activities. And so that's why the two really need to be addressed and looked at together. I think there's a lot of evidence going back in time from these studies as well as earlier studies from sub-Saharan Africa showing how social protection can help address some of these constraints in terms of access to credit, liquidity, and help households in their productive activities. And I think there's also been a lot of evidence showing that social protection as an infusion of cash into local communities also contributes to the economic development of these communities, as most of the beneficiaries spend this money on locally produced goods. And so we've documented that there are very important multiplier effects in local communities. But I think it's also clear that social protection isn't enough. We clearly need to link the social protection with assistance and programs and policy on the productive economic side. And that means agriculture, particularly in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. Just to review briefly kind of what are these complementary roles of social protection in agriculture. Social protection increases access to more and better quality food, while obviously agriculture leads to the increase in household food production and the availability of food and the diversity of food that's available in local markets. Social protection, by definition, plays a very important role in terms of strengthening risk management and resilience, helping protect assets and incomes from shocks, reducing risk aversion, and allowing households to engage in riskier but more profitable livelihood strategies. And of course, in agriculture, specific instruments such as agriculture insurance can protect farmers from shocks as well. And practices such as conservation agriculture can help build up long-term resilience. Social protection also can directly support productive investments, again, by alleviating liquidity and credit constraints, which helps households to invest in agricultural activities in the variable costs that they face. Whereas ag policy, of course, focuses on new technologies, information, extension services, allowing households to intensify their production and increase their productivity. And then finally, social protection, by providing income support, can help households shift away from casual labor, let's say work on other people's farms, to work on their own farms, right? Because there's less of a need to go out and get that liquidity. And of course, in agriculture, improved labor technologies increase labor productivity on and off farm. Another way of seeing it is kind of how agricultural policy can address a number of the structural constraints that are faced in agricultural production, whereas social protection addresses a lot of the variable, let's say, constraints. Now, specifically, we're looking at 4 country studies that were carried out in sub-Saharan Africa as part of this project. It's 4 countries with 4 very different approaches, okay? In Ethiopia, it was the social protection program with multiple components nested within the productive safety nets program, which is implemented by the Ministry of Agriculture. But there is this add-on, which is the improved nutrition through integrated basic social services with social cash transfer, which was implemented by the Ministry of Labor and Social Action, MOSA. In Lesotho, we had separate social protection and livelihood programs designed in a complementary way, managed by the same ministry, the Ministry of Social Development. You had the Child Grants Program, as well as the Springs Program, but the Springs Program was outsourced in terms of implementation to an NGO. In Mali, we had a shock responsive social protection pilot with multiple components, not implemented by the government, but implemented by FAO, which was primarily as a tool in order to reinforce resilience in the Sahel. Then finally, in Zambia, we had separate social protection and agricultural programs implemented by 2 different institutions, 2 different ministries, okay? We had the Homegrown school feeding program, and we had the conservation scale-up CASU. So 4 different models, 4 different ways of bringing together the social protection and productive elements. In terms of the study design, each of the 4 cases had a quantitative study in which non-experimental methods were used in an impact evaluation in order to determine causality in terms of the role that these different programs had jointly in terms of impacting outcomes of interest. In 3 of the 4 countries, we also had a qualitative study to get down and more deeply ask questions from beneficiaries and those who are managing the program as to the perceived impacts. And then finally, for 3 out of the 4, we also did an institutional analysis, again, looking at what are the institutional issues around implementing and coordinating these kinds of programs. Just very briefly, I just want to go into some of the detail around each of the 4 countries. I'm not going to look at everything on these tables. There's a lot of information there. The program objective in Ethiopia was around improving food security, nutrition, and resilience, and specifically nutritional outcomes for pregnant and lactating women, which was the add-on program, who were moved from the public works part of the program to the direct transfers because they were pregnant or just given birth. This is the 2nd largest program in Africa, 8 million beneficiaries, and this was a pilot focusing specifically on this add-on dimension, okay? The way the beneficiaries were brought in was through enrollment and registration conducted by social workers and development agents at a local level. And the registry was maintained by the Ministry of Ag for the public works beneficiaries and MOLSA for the cash transfer participants. The program benefits were cash or food combined with pre and postnatal and nutrition counseling and nutrition sensitive agriculture. Okay, and there were some co-responsibilities in terms of nutrition and health monitoring for pregnant and lactating women. And there was a work requirement for households with labor capacity, which is how the PSNP operates. In Lesotho, we have, it was, again, the original main program was the Child Grants Program, which is the, let's say, the flagship social assistance program in the country, a national program, and then a large national program, and then within that same ministry, they developed the Springs program. The eligibility for the CGP was poor and vulnerable households with orphans and vulnerable children under the age of 17, whereas for Springs, it was any community member was eligible, and about 60% of the beneficiaries were also CGP beneficiaries. The CGP, the beneficiary enrollment and registration, was managed by the ministry and through the NISA, which is the National, let's say, Registry for Social Assistance Programs. And for Springs, it was carried out by the NGO that was brought in to manage this program, CRS. And so the CGP had quarterly cash payments, while the Springs brought in homestead gardening, nutrition counseling, saving and lending groups, and market clubs, so a variety of services. And here, there's very good coordination at the community council level in order to make these programs work, okay? Now with Mali was, again, it was a standalone project, time-bound, in 36 villages, with this focus on focusing on poor, extremely poor and food insecure households selected through a mix of different criteria. Half of the beneficiary households received cash before the lean season, and half received cash along with productive inputs, including goats, animal feed and training, and livestock breeding. And all the beneficiaries were trained in essential nutrition, hygiene, child feeding, and other care practices. The cash was delivered by program implementers, and the inputs and the capacity development was through extension agents. And finally, in Zambia, again, we had two programs implemented by two different ministries. One was the Homegrown School Feeding Program, which was around increasing school attendance, educational achievement, while stimulating, local farm production. And then the KASU, which was about scaling up conservation agriculture to increase production of crops for food security and income generation. Okay. The Homegrown School Feeding Program was in 38 different districts, covering around 1 million children, whereas the KASU involved more than 10,000 lead farmers and 220,000 following farmers in 31 districts. In the Homegrown School Feeding, all the children attending school received 1 meal a day, while farmers needed to belong to a cooperative in order to participate, whereas in the KASU, farmers were identified from an available registry. And the benefits, finally, it was 1 meal per day for school children, and for farmers, it was guaranteed purchase of a preset quantity of pulses through these cooperatives, while for KASU, it was agricultural input and credit vouchers, along with training in conservation agricultural practices and business management. So what were the findings from the impact evaluations? Overall, we found a series of impacts above and beyond the individual impact of each program. And what we've reported here on the screen are let's say the synergistics, the impacts of the combination of the social and productive interventions, right? And all of the programs had impact over a number of dimensions of productive outcomes, right? In terms of whether livestock, whether crop production, improving access to markets, et cetera. So that was very consistent across all 4 programs. Again, 4 very different programs, very different contexts, but each of them together, the combination of the social and productive interventions generated positive synergies. We also looked across a number of other dimensions, looking at income and poverty reduction, where and food security. And we see in most of the programs, there was important impacts in terms of reducing food insecurity, improving dietary diversity, in some cases, in reducing poverty and increasing income. You don't always see necessarily the same impacts here as you do in productive outcomes, as the increase in revenue from increasing productive outcomes doesn't always translate into necessarily into a poverty reduction. But here we see it in a number of the countries. Then finally, in Lesotho, we also found important impacts on financial dimensions around borrowing and saving, the reduction of negative coping strategies, and also in Mali, there was important impacts on psychological and social impacts. Quickly, the findings from the institutional analysis. The one, we found that coordination between social protection, rural productive development programs is key, right? And perhaps the most difficult of all. We also found that the ag sector tends to prioritize a larger scale agriculture and views farmers as target population of the social sector, right? Which makes it difficult often to bring these two sectors together. Political support for these programs is necessary, and really what's the biggest challenge is the appropriate coordination mechanisms between different levels of government, how you embed the different workflows and transparent information, staff continuity and capacity, particularly at the local level. Vertical coordination is also important, given that there are many design difficulties are resolved during the implementation phase, often at territorial level. So finally, just a few takeaways. First, social protection, and it's clear from the evidence that social protection and productive interventions can complement each other and generate larger impacts than when implemented separately. It's also clear, given the impact on the productive side, that these can play an important role in offsetting the impacts of COVID-19 and in the process of recovery. But really, coordination among ministries, within ministries, is very challenging, and there's no single model or strategy for achieving it. What's also key here is convergence in policy objectives, giving coordination mechanisms sufficient authority and means to promote this cross-sectional work, provide the right incentives, and the use of common or harmonized planning, programming, and monitoring tools. Again, there's no blueprint, there's no model. It's really, it depends very much on the particular conditions and situation as to what's the best approach to take. It is important to keep programs simple and flexible and to respond to changing needs or unexpected shocks. And finally, it's fundamentally important to build capacity at local level, including adequate budgeting for local staff. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin Davis. Before you leave, you have some inquiries coming directly to you in the chat, and if I may quickly point them out. Patience Chiridong asks, I wish to find out if there are models for market linkages, both for regional and international markets, and also for agri-tech to increase value addition for smallholders. Yes, can you take that? I saw another. Let me quickly find that other one. But yes, would you answer that in the meantime?
Yeah, no, but of course, yeah, no, definitely there are different models for how to improve these kind of market linkages. Not necessarily linked to social protection, at least off the top of my head, right? I mean, I think the role that social protection plays in terms of the dimensions of markets, as well as this issue of ag tech to increase value addition. It's really about addressing some of the more immediate constraints which holds back farmers from participating in markets or producing enough or being able to access technology, And that's really about liquidity and having just basic fundamental liquidity in order to invest in activities or be able to work on their farm and not have to go work as a wage laborer on someone else's farm. So I think So in that sense, the social protection role is really basic in terms of being able to facilitate more market participation, more production, and managing risks and managing liquidity, right? Beyond that, of course, there are not any number of models in terms of how to improve market linkages of farmers once they have sufficient supply to be able to connect and link with these different kinds of markets. No?
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin Davis. I'll leave it at that. I'm afraid we are pressed for time, but we would like to hear from the Latin America professor, Professor Higno Maldonado. Please do come and share with us perspectives from that other side. Thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin. We are grateful.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you everyone for your participation in this high-level event. I will share my screen now. Hope you can see it. Do you get me and getting the video?
Yes.
Yes, we do. We can see your screen, Prof. Please proceed.
Perfect. Thank you. So I want to show you some of the results of a project that is called Improving the Articulation Between Social Protection Programs and Rural Development, Lessons from Africa and Latin America. And as Benjamin was mentioning, all of these efforts is based on the belief that the articulation between social protection programs and productive rural development interventions can contribute to overcome the poverty traps and to break the intergenerational transmission of poverty and vulnerability of the households, particularly in the rural sector. And we have realized also that it is important at this moment in which we need to increase the resilience of households under shocks such as the current pandemic. This project, we call it the Rural Synergies, and was carried out by Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, was a project financed by IFAD, and we have the technical and financial support of FAO, as Benjamin just has shown the results. In general, we have some confidence on the positive effects between the programs so that the policymakers can be informed about the strategies for interventions aimed to reduce rural poverty. So at the end, what we want to see is if we have a household that is receiving social protection policies and productive inclusion policies, this household is able to take advantage of synergies or complementarities between these two types of interventions and have better results than if they were receiving only one of those interventions. As Benjamin showed, we run impact evaluations and institutional analysis in almost all of the cases. Benjamin has mentioned the cases in Africa, Ethiopia, Lesotho, Mali, and Zambia. I want to show you quickly the results for Colombia, Peru, and Mexico that are the part in Latin America in which we run this analysis. We have 4 cases as well in the case of Latin America. In Colombia, we have 2 cases, one more in Peru and the other one in Mexico. And in all of the cases, we wanted to see if the combination or the articulation of rural development programs and social protection interventions could have a particular positive effect on the household. Given the limitation on time, I am not going into the details, but I want to show you that we analyzed several variables as well. And we found, for instance, that in the productive activities, we observed an increase in the acquisition of assets in Colombia, increases in the adoption of technologies in Peru, mainly for farming, We observed in Colombia reductions in the poverty, not only economic or monetary poverty, but multidimensional poverty, an increase of income in Peru. There is an important result related with food security. We observe in almost all of the cases a transition to more food security within the households over the time. And in particular, is of relevance the use of home gardens to guarantee not only food security, but also nutritional security within the households. In terms of access to financial services, we observe increases in the use of informal savings, and also an important effect in the reduction of shark loans that are high rate loans with the difficult conditions for the household. So the household were able to cope and reduce the presence of this type of loans. And perhaps one of the most important topics in which I want to highlight the results is the increase in the current perception of well-being and about the future, and the strengthening of the agency through improvements in the internal locus of the households. Those are what we call soft variables or social variables that are usually overlooked when we are analyzing the impact of programs. But now we are observing that, in fact, those variables can play an important role in the generation of possibilities for the household. So perhaps what I want to highlight in general from these studies is first that we have to consider the context in a particular way in terms of access to markets for the households. We have emphasized a lot in the necessity of provide public goods to the households, roads, access to electricity. Now we have with the pandemic the importance of having access to internet or having access to communication. We also emphasize the relevance of considering the effects of climate change and to anticipate the possible effects of climate change to guarantee that interventions can be positive for both, for the households and for the governments that are doing such a huge effort in providing these programs. As I just mentioned, we want to insist in the relevance of the soft skills strengthening to combat the internal restrictions that the households can have. Sometimes we have observed that they can have the money, they can have the assets, they can have the means for improving their income generation or the productivity, but given internal restrictions, they are not able to do that. We also want to emphasize the necessity of having this network of social protection. With the pandemic, it was very important to realize how important it is to guarantee a cash transfers for the poorest households, so they have a safety net in which to rest their necessities. And if we can solve these first step necessities of the household, then we can move into productive activities. And of course, from this analysis on the synergies, we also are providing a recommendations on moving into integral approaches that may help to accelerate the reduction of the poverty in the rural areas. We have generated documents with all of the results of these studies, not only the studies from Latin America, but also the studies in Africa that we did with the support and the help of FAO. So you can observe from one-pagers that have in one page showing the main results of every case, to country summaries, country reports, and up to the more extensive technical reports. All of the information you can find that in our page, sinergiasrurales.info, we have a page in Spanish and in English. Unfortunately, we don't have the page in French, but we have the page in Spanish and in English, so you can look at them and find and download all of the documents. As I mentioned, not only for Latin America, but also for the Africa cases that Benjamin just presented. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Maldonado. Thank you very much for this presentation and for giving us that other perspective. Indeed, we are speaking really similar things when we press for the need for social protection in pushing for the agenda that helps us to see rural transformation, rural development. I'll leave it at that because we are pressed for time, and ask that we move into our next session, which is a panel discussion. And if there are any questions in the chat for Professor Maldonado, please do put them. He does have very interesting perspectives to share from that other side of the globe. Thank you very much. To join us for this panel, I will call upon the panelists. To begin with, we are supposed to have Professor Eyasu Elias, who is the State Minister for Agriculture from Ethiopia, but he is unable to join us, and he has sent his advisor, and that is Mr. Melese Ansebo. Mr. Melese, if you're there, please do switch on your camera. We would like to see you and to begin to engage with you. We also have on the panel His Excellency Monsieur Modibo Keita, who is the Minister for Rural Development in Mali. You're most welcome to join the panel, Your Excellency. I'm also calling on Honorable Nkaku Kabi, who is the Minister for Agriculture and Food Security in Lesotho. I'm calling on Ms. Cecilia Mulindeti Kamanga, the Permanent Secretary ad interim of the Ministry of Agriculture in Zambia. And finally, Dr. Simplice Nowala Fonku, the Head of Division Agriculture and Food Security at the African Union Commission. All right, let's start here. Yes, let us, I'll kindly request Prof. Maldonado to switch off your camera, and let's have the panelists with us. Right. Yes, I'm going to kick off from the key takeaways that were shared by Dr. Benjamin Davis. And I'm going to ask this panel. First of all, we all seem to agree, and this has been a resounding message throughout this conference, that social protection and rural development must ride tandem, irrespective of the peculiar situations per country. So I'll pose my question to any of you randomly. Let me start with, when it's random, you pick on any. So I'm going to start with His Excellency. Yes, His Excellency Monsieur Keita from Mali. Share with us your views. What is missing if we are all having this conversation? What must be done to see that indeed we continuously blend social protection with development? Monsieur, over to you. And please, someone please post his bio in the chat. Let the participants know who is speaking to them. Yes, over to you, Your Excellency.
Ok, bonsoir à tout le monde. Donc, au nom du ministre Modibo Keita, dans un autre événement empêché, je tiens à remercier beaucoup la FAO pour cette initiative de haut niveau qui permet d'échanger sur la protection sociale et le développement rural. Comme Madame a posé la question tout à l'heure, je pense que le développement social et le développement rural vont de pair. On ne peut pas privilégier l'un par rapport à l'autre, car les deux sont fortement liés. Raison pour laquelle en République du Mali, nous avons quand même nous avons ciblé certaines activités majeures qui nous permettent de gérer les deux aspects. Quand on voit l'aspect des changements climatiques, nous sommes dans une zone sahélienne. Les conditions de production sont très difficiles, très rigoureuses souvent. Par exemple, cette campagne-ci, on a eu un démarrage très difficile de la campagne agricole. Et au mois de septembre, on a eu un arrêt précoce des pluies au niveau de certaines zones de production. Donc, tout ça, ça nous interpelle, ça amène une chute de production et ça détériore les conditions de vie des populations qui constituent à peu près 80% de nos populations. Donc, à ce niveau, le gouvernement malien a décidé de mettre en place un programme national pour l'irrigation de proximité. Donc, pour essayer d'atténuer un peu les effets néfastes des changements climatiques. Deuxièmement, et ce programme s'étend sur 10 ans, renouvelable. Nous sommes en train de préparer actuellement la vision générative. Donc, pour pouvoir exploiter judicieusement ces aménagements, donc nous avons élaboré aussi une stratégie nationale de mise en valeur des aménagements hydro-agricoles. Cette stratégie a son sens parce que avant, on vulgarisait les mêmes technologies sur toute l'étendue du territoire, sans tenir compte des zones agroécologiques, sans tenir compte de la nature des sols. Donc, on a essayé de mettre une stratégie nationale en place qui permet aux paysans de ne pas dépenser, en tout cas à tue-tête. Ça nous permet vraiment d'investir judicieusement sur ces ressources pour avoir un rendement approprié. L'autre aspect, c'est aussi le conseil qu'on leur apporte. Donc, avant, le conseil était un peu loin de l'exploitation familiale agricole. Donc, maintenant, nous sommes en train de restructurer ce conseil agricole pour mettre un système national du conseil agricole en place. Donc, et aussi, par rapport à l'organisation des producteurs eux-mêmes, nous sommes dit que si nous ne travaillons pas sur l'interprofession, travailler par filière, mais travailler aussi sur les différentes familles de la filière, connecter les besoins des différentes familles les unes aux autres, afin de pouvoir avoir la durabilité de tout ce qu'on est en train de faire. Donc, l'État ne peut pas tout faire. Donc, raison pour laquelle nous pensons que la question que vous avez posée est pertinente, ne pas dissocier le développement de la protection.
Right. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, in sharing. It's great that you've shared that for the case of Mali, you actually have a national irrigation program that has been running for a while that focuses on both issues, social protection and rural development. Thank you very much. Colleagues, once again, participants, I would like to emphasize that if you need translation, it is available on the lower part of your screen. Let us get it there. I'll now move over to Honorable Kabi, the Minister for Agriculture and Food Security in Lesotho. Yes, Honorable Minister, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, madam.
Wonderful.
Yes, actually it's not Honorable Kabi, it's acting Principal Secretary for Minister of Agriculture. He had to attend urgent cabinet meeting, but however, he has sent me to represent him. Listening to
all right, thank you. Thank you very much. Shall we get your full names?
Masia Johani.
All right, thank you very much.
Masia.
Masia, thank you very much. Yeah. My question to you is, and I trust you've been following.
Yes,
yes, we did hear from Dr. Benjamin some takeaways after the 4 studies have been conducted. But earlier, we also heard from Ms. Sarah, who said that social protection is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Now, with that in mind, but also considering that these studies were done in 4 countries, what would you say are at least the basic elements that should be present in a social protection policy, irrespective of which part of the world it is? Those must-haves that you'd say, okay, give us like 2 or 3 to inform.
Yes, madam. No, thanks for giving us this opportunity, and let me pay my respect to all honors that are here with you. It is a very clear fact that cannot be disputed that investing in agriculture, linking it with social protection, is a quick way of getting to those rural poor who have no access to resources. That is even listening to Professor's presentation, immediately you do that social protection process, it means you are providing them with ability, a cash to be able to access agriculture inputs, and that they can now be in a state to produce their own food. This one, I can give you an example of those people who are not able to produce anything in the fields. They target, in our case, summer growing season, and they know that they will get employment of doing different, maybe weeding, all different farm works that can be done. And this is how these people access funds for different various use in a family setting. But I also want to emphasize that as this rural poor engage in the production, which is acting simultaneously, it will also enable them now to participate in the market. They will not just be watching the events and what is happening. But again, let's remember, we have just been in a food system dialogue. And one of the things that we were looking for is a game-changing solution. And the game-changing solution that will answer to the problems of the food system that we have. And we have agreed, I think, as African Common Position, that food almost touches on almost 12 SDGs, of which we agreed that Africa is off track. By this social protection, merging it with agriculture, I think it's giving us immediate answer to the masses of our poor rural people who have access to nothing. But again, I learned from the lessons of other countries that sometimes they match it with school feeding, which means the school feeding programs immediately become a market for their produce. But in this country, again, where this kind of social protections have been applied before, we call it food for work, where people actually work for a specific period, a specific number of days, maybe on the road construction, and they get food instead of cash. And it has proved to be successful in a manner that it has actually enabled them to construct or to come together to achieve a common goal that benefits a society as a whole.
Wonderful. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Masia. If I may chip in on that, thank you for pointing us to the food system dialogue that happened recently and what you read in relation to school feeding. But if you will, would you kindly share with us specifically in relation to how your country was able to conduct these programs and their positive impact in improving livelihoods? We are speaking in the context of COVID-19. What would you say
you mean the social programs?
Yes, and speaking in the context of COVID-19 and how it will contribute to the recovery plan of your country.
Yes, we are contributing to the recovery plan by actually targeting these vulnerable households, and by providing them with, we use specific vouchers that enable them to procure specific seeds that they can plant. That is a quick way of recovery post-COVID-19. And most of these people in the mountains who are more vulnerable have accessed these specific seed vouchers, and they have the seeds, and they have embarked on the planting of, and this has a positive impact in some of them because they have immediate access to food, which was a challenge during COVID-19 pandemic, when some of the borders, remember Lesotho is completely surrounded by its neighbors South Africa. So if the movement is restricted into another country, it becomes very dangerous if they have not grown their home food. But these vouchers of seeds that were handed over to some of these vulnerable groups have enabled them now to come up with immediate food that can be found within household context. I don't know if I've
well, thank you. Wow, thank you very much. That's a good point to note, that it has enabled them come up with quick solutions to addressing their food needs. Wonderful. I'll leave it at that for now and move on to Dr. Simplice Nowala Ponku, if you're here. He is the head of division Agriculture and Food Security at the African Union Commission. Yes, Doctor, tell us, how is targeting done for the beneficiaries to ensure equity and equality when it comes to addressing issues of social protection? Do I have you, Dr. Simplice Nowala?
Hey.
Would you kindly switch on your video?
How old is he?
Masia Johan, it's you speaking. Are you with Dr. Nowala? We cannot get him. If you're not with him, or you're not the one, kindly mute. We are trying to find Dr. Nowala. But as we find him, I'll pose that very question to, I'll take that very question to Ethiopia, where again we received apologies from Professor Eyasu Elias, but nonetheless, we have his advisor, that is Mr. Melese Ansebo. Mr. Ansebo, are you here? I hope you are. Would you please kindly switch on your camera? Okay, all right, we're having a bit of a lag there, but nonetheless, I will still put the same question to Miss Cecilia Mulindeti Kamanga. She's the Permanent Secretary ad interim of the Ministry of Agriculture, Zambia. I do hope you're here with us. Miss Cecilia, would you kindly switch on your microphone and also the camera? We'd love to see you.
Sorry, I'm representing Mrs. Kamanga. My name is Moses Mali. I'm director in the Department of Agriculture.
All right. Thank you very much, Moses. I'll take it on with you. We are discussing, and I trust you've been following the proceedings. We are discussing social protection, and we are discussing rural development, right? We would like you to share with us how these programs were specifically selected for your country and the impact that they created in Zambia.
Thank you very much. Zambia is divided into 3 agroecological regions. And when we came to the conservation agriculture program, we made sure that all the 3 agroecological regions were represented, because poverty is cutting across. But when you look at the issues of the conservation agriculture program, it was like it has been presented, covered 31 districts, 11 which were common also with the homegrown school feeding program. And this is a program, conservation agriculture consists of production methods that reduce farmers' vulnerability to climate risks and improve productivity. And this CASU program promoted the use of such methods as smallholders through training and demonstration and provision of inputs, aiming for adoption of more sustainable farming, which increases farm productivity in the long run. But like it's been also mentioned, the other program, the Ministry of Education was implementing, in fact, is still implementing the Homegrown school feeding program, where school children are provided with nutritious meals, which are prepared from food procured from local small-scale farmers. By so doing, the children's nutrition status is improved and they are helped to remain in school. But further to this, Chair, we've also learned some lessons, and we are continuing with the Farmer Input Support Program. This is a subsidy program that helps with a social, which has a social face that the Zambian government has been implementing through the Ministry of Agriculture. In this program, small-scale farmers buy inputs that are subsidized by government. Evidently, food production increased in 2020-2021 agricultural marketing season due to good rainfall and early distribution of inputs. And finally, the provision of relief assistance also has to come into play when you look at social protection in the rural development, where COVID relief funds and the Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit under the Vice President Office also provides beneficial interventions to those communities which are vulnerable. Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Director of Agriculture, Mr. Moses Mwale. Finally, to pick it from you, if there was a takeaway from this conference, from this dialogue, from this high-level discussion that you want key policymakers listening to you, key policymakers like yourself, to go away with, what would it be? And I want you to speak in relation to Zambia, but also to speak in relation to this conference, given that we are speaking really with the entire continent. What would that be? Absolutely. I mean, we know that there's synergies between social protection and rural development to support pro-poor growth. I think this should lead governments to step up efforts to make agricultural interventions, which would include increasing production and productivity, because I think in our small scale farmers, production and productivity is rather low. We need to really increase this, either by looking at increased irrigation where it's relevant or increased mechanization. And also we need to look at output marketing and market access. I think small scale farmers should be able to access markets. We also need to look at skills training and knowledge transfers and post-harvest handling and value addition. I think many times we find that what we produce also is lost due to lack of post-harvest and value addition. I think those are some of the issues that we need to concentrate on, Chair, I think. Thank you very much and well stated. Dr. Nowala, what should be the takeaway for us from you as we wind up this panel discussion and close this session of the discussion? Dr. Simplice Nowala. All right, as we wait for you to join us, can I still ask what the takeaway would be from another member of the panel? Your Excellency, Monsieur Keita, what should we take away in this discussion about the findings from the field, but also social protection, rural development, for the benefit of policymakers that are here, like yourself? All right, just in case he's not with us, I'll still proceed because we are pressed for time. We've received apologies from Ethiopia, and we do understand what that means. It's been put in the chat.
Oui. Est-ce qu'elle peut reprendre la question, s'il vous plaît?
Daniel Simeon?
Oui.
Ah.
I'm here.
Wonderful, there you are. Yes, we are coming to the close of this panel discussion. And we are asking you to speak, yes, not only on behalf of your country, which is Mali, but generally for the continent and beyond. What should be the takeaway for the panelists here like yourself, but also for the other members logged in when it comes to the discussion on rural development and social protection? What are your parting remarks in brief?
Moi, je pense que nous devrons combiner les efforts pour contribuer à faire reculer la pauvreté et surtout la précarité en milieu rural. Si on ne combine pas les deux, il va de soi que le niveau urbain devient plus attrayant que le niveau rural. Parce que toutes les dispositions d'assurance, toutes les dispositions de subventions et autres, à part les intrants qui vont dans le milieu rural, les subventions qu'on apporte aux produits de première nécessité, c'est surtout les grands centres qui en profitent, pas le milieu rural. Donc, il faudrait que toutes nos actions de développement soient accompagnées en tout cas de la protection sociale. Et je voudrais donner comme début. Été suivi.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Dear participants, we shall leave it at that. We shall leave it at that for the panel discussion. But nonetheless, feel free to put any other inquiry that you have, please put it in the chat. Our team of experts will follow it up with you. Allow me go to the next section of this program, which is reactions from key stakeholders. And right away, call on Professor Stephen Devereaux, who is the Development Economist and Research Fellow and co-director of the Center for Social Protection at the Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex in United Kingdom. The rest of his CV is going to be put in the chat. And as he does that, please proceed. Over to you, Professor Stephen. We would appreciate if you can do this in the shortest time possible. And 5 minutes or so would be great.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I am very pleased to be part of this meeting and to contribute my thoughts to it. I have looked at the research studies and I think that they are very interesting and provide very important lessons. So I'm going to try and get through those in 5 minutes rather than 10 minutes as originally allocated. I wanted to start by making the point that at the conceptual level, linkages between social protection and productive inclusion are based on the existence of productive capacity in participating individuals or households. And this is important because we should never forget that social protection serves two groups of vulnerable people, those who are able to work and those who cannot work, such as persons with severe disability, or persons who should not work, such as children and older persons. For these labor-constrained vulnerable groups, social protection should be limited to social assistance, such as food assistance or cash transfers, and productive inclusion is not feasible or appropriate. On the other hand, graduation out of poverty is a realistic objective for interventions that link social protection to productive inclusion. However, evidence on how this will work in practice is lacking, especially in Africa. Approaches such as the graduation model in Bangladesh have not transferred to other countries except as small-scale pilot projects. And for this reason, the research we are discussing today is very welcome and adds important evidence to fill a significant knowledge gap in the literature. So I'm going to make brief observations on each of the 4 country case studies and then concluding remarks. So starting with the Productive Safety Net program in Ethiopia, that of course had both objectives in its name and its design. Safety nets include food or cash transfers, while the productive component was linked to household asset building packages or the assets created by public works projects. But few households benefited from these components, and that's why in its 4th cycle, the PSNP was linked to the INSCT project. And this evaluation found some notable successes, but also challenges. And some of those challenges were similar to other challenges that the PSNP has faced over its years, namely low transfer amounts and poor coordination between key stakeholders, both horizontally and vertically. And I think that some of the fundamental issues, such as competition rather than cooperation between key stakeholders, such as the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, require high-level political commitment and vision to achieve the ambitious objectives of rural transformation in Ethiopia. Moving on to Lesotho, I find that the evaluation finds very positive outcomes from the linking of the child grant program to the Springs Food Security Program, increases in income and reductions in poverty. And one reason for this is the synergy or multiplier effect between the cash transfer and the support to production through Springs. And an important lesson to learn is that although the child grant program targets children in poor households, this does not mean that the household has no productive capacity. Very important point. So this experience demonstrates a potential pathway out of poverty through productive inclusion, starting from social assistance that actually targets the non-working vulnerable group, in this case, children. So moving on to Mali, which looked at cash plus interventions, we know that cash plus interventions normally connect beneficiaries of social assistance to other social services, such as health insurance or child protection or even psychosocial services. The cash plus intervention in Mali linked cash transfer beneficiaries to income generating activities instead, thereby maximizing the income, employment, and production multipliers in households and communities. So a key finding is that households enjoyed higher livestock ownership and higher income from livestock, even after support from the program ended. And this for me is a definition of sustainability. So a very powerful finding there. However, we found again a challenge, which is the difficulty of coordinating social sectors with economic or productive sectors. And this is where more research and more innovative thinking are urgently needed. Finally, the case of Zambia, where homegrown school feeding was one of the programs that was looked at. And of course, homegrown school feeding is itself an integrated intervention because it delivers social assistance in the form of school meals to vulnerable children and also productive inclusion to smallholder farmers who are contracted to deliver food to those local schools. Here we found that there was an interesting contradiction, in fact, between the education objectives and the household food security objectives when these two programs were combined, which suggests that we need to be careful about overloading interventions with too many objectives. Another important finding relates to gender and the need to empower women to participate in productive opportunities to ensure that the benefits of such interventions are not captured entirely by men to the detriment or exclusion of women and children. So in conclusion, if I may make just a couple of brief points. Firstly, at the conceptual level, each of the 4 programs had a convincing theory of change, showing how combining social protection support with productive inclusion should raise incomes and transform livelihoods. However, an important learning is that trying to achieve too many objectives at the same time can result in contradictions and trade-offs. As Benjamin Davis said, it is important to keep programs simple. Secondly, at the operational level, all 4 case studies demonstrate either positively or negatively the critical importance of coherence and coordination, both vertically from the capital city down to the village and horizontally across sectors, ministries, agencies, and development partners. Third point, in terms of gender, I think this is an area that's perhaps under-researched in these studies. Conventionally, social programs often target women, while economic programs often target men. So 2 lessons I would draw from these case studies are that women should be given equal or even preferential access to income earning opportunities, and that impact evaluations should always consider the disaggregated gendered impacts. And my very last point, looking forward, as households that were devastated by COVID-19 lockdowns and disruptions to food value chains try to rebuild their livelihoods, the synergies between social protection and productive inclusion have never been clearer or more urgently needed. This research study is timely because it shows how such synergies can be achieved and how effectively they can contribute to building resilient livelihoods and driving processes of inclusive rural transformation. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much. We do appreciate that you really kept the time quite tight. Thank you very much, Professor Stephen. Yes, and you said something very interesting there. Social protection programs usually target women and economic programs target the men, and that the synergies have never been clearer for us to have this discussion on the need to have a good blend. Thank you very much, Prof. Please do stay with us because now we move into an open discussion. There could be questions for you in the chat. Just hang around, but also let me call upon the panelists to join us. We have Dr. Tavengwa, Executive Director, African Platform for Social Protection from Zimbabwe. Are you here? We would like you to make your contribution on this presentation from Professor Stephen, but also any other that you had. Or if you're not here, we've been told you could have sent a representative, Mr. Martin Mbuvi from Kenya. As you get ready, our dear panelists, we do have a very short video that is really driving the point home on social protection and agriculture, saving lives and livelihoods in Lesotho. Francis, shall we please have that video?
Kaya a sokola ha re tla masimong e ba go komello dijo ha di hlahe re sokola tšhelete e re selang ke mmemaditse magamaota.
She is not the only one struggling. In Lesotho, hundreds of thousands of families live in poverty. Many people are affected by HIV/AIDS. 33% of children under 5 are severely malnourished, and they face acute agricultural challenges. Fragile natural resources, land degradation, little access to markets, and a changing climate. In 2015, El Niño emergency affected almost 700,000 people, with devastating consequences on their livelihoods and food security. Especially for poor farmers, bouncing back is hard. In 2009, rural poor in Lesotho started receiving cash transfers through the Child Grant Program implemented by the Ministry of Social Development. This brought positive impacts on the local economy, education and school enrollment, children living standards, agricultural production. Cash transfers are a powerful tool to combat hunger and poverty, but their impacts can be maximized. Agriculture in Lesotho is important. 50% of the rural population depends on it. Investing in poor farmers is crucial. By building on the success of the CGP, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security now provides home gardening and nutrition kits to CGP beneficiaries. Food insecurity in times of crisis has been fading away, but there is a need to go further. Helping people to move out of poverty takes more. New agriculture techniques to respond to climate change impacts, diverse food on their table, health services, access to markets and agricultural inputs, trainings on saving resources to face shocks and crises, easier access to education. Rural people in Lesotho can be productive and can bounce back after crisis. Social protection and agriculture together can save lives and livelihoods.
Okay, thank you to our technical team. So, dear participants, this is an open discussion. If you have a question or a submission that you'd like to share with us, that could be country specific or that could be continental or global in nature, whatever the case, this is your chance. And again, we are grateful that you're still with us. Those questions that have been posted over time, I noticed that our team has been answering them in the chat. So yes, over to you. Anyone with a submission? As we wait on you, let me call on Dr. Tavengwa, if you're here, to give us the perspective from the farmers, or Mr. Martin Mbuvi. But also to emphasize that if you've not been able to follow some of the proceedings, there will be a live link. There's been, but it will also be, this recording will be available on YouTube. Don't feel that you've missed out. All right, Martin. Okay, as we wait for that, yes, Mauto, would you please make your submission? Thank you. Over to you. Please make it brief. We are pressed for time.
Thank you very much. I just want to, first of all, thank you for the opportunity and also to underscore the presentations that have been made, especially what Davis presented concerning the integration of standalone social protection and then livelihood creation programs. I must say that combining them in an integrated manner is a strong strategy to address rural poverty, especially looking at it from the angle of the rural economy. We in Ghana here have been doing that for quite some time now, and we are seeing the benefits especially linking cash transfer programs that we have with the livelihood creation interventions has really contributed to the resilience of the rural economy. Key in doing this is the effective and efficient coordination among the stakeholders, right from the national level to the local level. With effective and efficient coordination mechanism, I believe that a lot can be achieved, you know, when we combine both the livelihood programs as well as the social protection cash transfer programs to address poverty. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Fatu. Thank you very much. Yes. Mauto, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Thank you for your submission. Okay, that is it. I want to believe that that many of your questions have been answered as we went along, right? But if they haven't, please do put them in the chat, and remember that wait, there's John Majisi. Yes. In a minute or two, you're welcome to make your submission. John, dear John, you're muted. Kindly unmute.
I asked a question related to targeting. How do we target our beneficiaries to ensure equity and equality? Let me give a typical example. In Ghana, we have this free SHS program where people go to secondary school without paying any fees. But I can assure you that there are quite a number of them who have all the monies that we can talk about, who can take care of their children. And there are people who are so depressed and very poor to the extent that even with the free SHS, they are not able to take their people to school. Now let me look at the issue of disability. People with disability are the poorest, are the poor among the poorest. To what extent are we able to target them and to cover them and to provide the necessary social intervention to enable them to become inclusive? So for me, I think the issue of targeting is very, very important. And so I thought that some of these things could come up in our discussion so that we'll see what we can do as far as equity and equality is concerned. Thank you. And then one other thing is the possibility of political interference. If we have a coordinating outfit, to what extent is that coordinating outfit free enough to discharge its duties without any political interference? Are there lessons that we can learn so that this thing can be useful to other countries? Thank you.
Much, John. Professor Stephen, if you're still here, would you please take on the question from John? Professor Stephen, John inquires, how is the targeting of the beneficiaries done to ensure equity and equality?
Thank you for that question. It's a very tricky issue. Targeting is probably the most difficult thing to do in social protection programs. It's possibly easier when you're looking at rural development programs because obviously targeting smallholder farmers with input subsidies or fertilizer and seeds is relatively straightforward. But when you're looking for who is vulnerable and who is poor, it's very difficult to say this household which has got 3 chickens is poorer than this household that's got 4 chickens. And the situation can change very rapidly. For example, with COVID-19, a lot of people were impoverished very quickly. So it's difficult to target people using income poverty, especially in areas where people don't have very high incomes and incomes are very erratic and unpredictable. And in such contexts, I think a more common approach is categorical targeting. So for example, people with disabilities, older persons, children, vulnerable categories like street children in urban areas. And of course, farmers on the basis of their food deficit situation can get access to inputs or subsidies or yeah. So I would say that targeting really should be done probably more in terms of demographic and geographic targeting. You know where the areas are where people are poor, go to those areas and try and identify who needs help within those areas. But it is a huge challenge and we never get it 100% right. There's always somebody left out who shouldn't be left out and somebody who's included who shouldn't be included.
Thank you very much, Prof. John, my apologies. I would request that you put the rest of the questions you had, or 2 more, in the chat and someone will respond to you. I'm afraid I'm not going to have good time to ask someone to respond to you right now, but allow me proceed because we are pressed for time, and to ask participants to allow us enter into your about 5 or 10 more minutes of your time to allow us conclude this. Yes, I'll now call upon Mr. Raymond Besong. Mr. Raymond Besong is the Chief Development. In a minute or two, give us the perspectives of development partners from your side of the coin. Over to you, Mr. Raymond. And please, someone put his profile in the chat. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Marion. I think the African Development Bank subscribes fully to the findings of the studies, and practically we have also been developing approaches that combine social protection with productive rural development. And in particular, the aspect of nutrition. In 2018, we actually rolled out a multi-sectoral nutrition action plan, which really aims at increasing investments in nutrition smart agriculture and scaling up investments in health, agriculture, social protection, and education. And we consider that this is really critical, in supporting the most vulnerable. And also one of our flagship projects, programs, which you might know of, is the Technologies for African Agriculture Transformation, which is really aimed at harnessing technologies to raise agricultural productivity on the continent, mitigate risks, and promote diversification and processing in agricultural value chains. And that's really a project which has been rolled out and supported, more than 40 billion people to be lifted out of poverty on the continent. So I think we, on the whole, we are also developing a tool which we'll be using to integrate social protection more into most of our infrastructure projects, which usually take the lion's share of the investments we make annually. But in terms of ensuring that we take some of the lessons learned, from this event today, to help us, properly develop that tool, is going to have a social protection and social inclusion marker system, which will enable us to better design, our projects in the future to integrate social protection and ensure that we get the benefits of lifting, more vulnerable people out of poverty and building resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raymond, for telling us about that upcoming social protection tool. And I do hope that interested participants can quickly get a hold of it as soon as it is ready. Over to you, Mr. Ernest Ruzindaza, who is a senior agriculture economist at the World Bank. Please share with us the perspective from that other side. In a minute or two, it would be nice to switch on your video. Ernest Ruzindaza, as we wind this up. All right. Ernest, as soon as you're able to join us, we would like to hear your perspective, or at least put it in the chat. We don't want to miss out on what is coming from the World Bank as a perspective. It could be another tool that we need to be aware of. Ernest, please, someone who can get to Ernest, help us tickle him and say the conference is missing your submission. But yes, I'll now move on to our very last session, which is a wrap up and closing. Thank you everyone who has stayed with us. Dr. Alice Mutiti Mwetwa, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary at Reform Uganda, come take up this session, give us the key messages as we begin to close. Dr. Alice, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marion, and thank you for the wonderful moderation, and thank you for all the presentations, all protocols observed. Very quickly, we started off with Marion giving us this, the setting for this particular meeting. introduced us to the meeting and the objectives of this particular workshop webinar. And you agree with me that we've had very enriching discussions this afternoon. We received from Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel submissions and insights from FAO that indeed the social protection currently is receiving more attention now than ever before, and that the policy frameworks that we have together with the planning need to promote the role of agriculture and social protection together. However, the level of investment has not matched the needs that we see, for that particular attention. This coupled with the fact that the COVID-19 has confounded the problem of hunger and affecting mostly the rural youth, women, displaced persons, and migrants. So what we need, therefore, is to have adequate capacities to manage right now the multiple shocks that are rocking the African continent, to have multi-sectoral linkages, as well as to have coherent programs that can improve the situation of vulnerable communities, and also to have well-designed and more inclusive social protection programs. Then we received a submission and a very wonderful presentation from Ms. Sarah Mbago Bundu, and she implored us on the need to invest more in agriculture and to recognize the need to look at investments in social programs, to link those to agriculture, and also reminded us that this matter is very, very urgent right now. And looking at social protection programs, that these tend to improve inclusiveness, and that currently IFAD has the ambition to invest in the rural people and also has several programs that are directing investments to social protection. She also reminded us that the social protection programs cannot be viewed as a one-size-fits-all, but although social protection is necessary, it must be contextual. So there's always an element of context, and must focus on women as well as child health and nutrition. We received remarks on behalf of Reform from Dr. Florence Nakaiwa, who indicated that currently Reform has expanded the scope of its programming to include out-of-school youth among other focus groups, including women, so that the education sector now can become more connected to emerging and new challenges that are facing the youth as well as rural communities, and that young people have to be part of agricultural transformation processes, and that we need to have meaningful partnerships going forward. And that what we have today, and I guess many other opportunities coming, is an opportunity for policymakers at the highest level to come together with academia, civil servants, civil society, development partners, and others to reflect on how to enhance that interconnectedness and then influence all that we need to transform our ag system. We received a wonderful video from Ambassador Sako, and she emphasized that Africa is still relying on agriculture. There's still extreme poverty and malnutrition and hunger, and that agriculture social protection are strongly linked in rural areas, and that African leaders indeed made some commitments when they signed the Malabo Declaration, and this entailed integrating measures of social protection, which would result in increasing gross agricultural productivity as well as production. And that on linkages, there's need for innovation and multi-sectoral interventions, and that there's more that is needed to improve coherence between the spheres of agriculture and social protection, and also to enhance those particular linkages among different players. There's also need to, in terms of funding, to move towards innovative financing models for social protection programs, and to target and to have targeted budget lines dedicated to social protection in African countries. We received a submission also in the second session that we went into from Dr. Benjamin Davis. And he explained to us why agriculture and social protection go together, and emphasized that the agriculture producers are usually the beneficiaries of the social protection programs, and they tend to have limited access to health, capital, as well as agricultural inputs. And that social protection alone is not enough, but needs to be linked to systems and programs, as well as production. And he gave us an outline of at least gave us insight into the 4 studies that were done, and that they were focused there were different approaches in the different countries, 4 different models that were used, and these brought together the studies. So arising from those studies were some takeaways. One is that social protection and productive interventions are synergistic, and that social protection can offset the impact of COVID-19. There is a need to promote cross-sectional work. There is a need also to keep programs simple and flexible, and that social protection should facilitate market participation. And then we had, connected to that, a submission where we got insights into the Latin American context, specifically Peru and Mexico. And the findings, once again, showed that when you have social protection and rural development programs together, there is an increase in asset acquisition, informal savings, reduction in food insecurity, reduction in poverty, increase in perception of well-being. But there is need to approach it in the context. So there's always need to have a context in mind of where the interventions are being implemented. And also he pointed us, and thank you very much, Professor Maldonado, to where we can find the different reports, starting from snapshot reports to where we can get details on the reports of these particular studies. We got a submission then from Honorable Minister from Mali, and he indicated to us that in Mali, social protection and rural development are interconnected, and there's need for a multi-sectoral approach. There's need to connect the two, and give us examples in Mali that there's a 10-year national irrigation program that is currently running. And also there's a national strategy that is focusing on social protection and rural development so that we can have solutions on both issues. And he also said, gave us parting remarks saying there is need to combine efforts to minimize poverty and to combine, social protection and R&D, and to invest so that to help farmers in rural areas in order to reduce poverty. So that was from Mali. We had a submission now also from the Kingdom of Lesotho, Eswatini, where Mr. Maser emphasized that the social protection programs the social protection programs are needed to meet the needs of the rural poor. And in the context of Eswatini, they, yes. So, with those, there's in the Kingdom of Eswatini, the Kingdom of apologies, Marion. So that was from Eswatini, and then we had submissions from Zambia, given by Mr. Mwale. His takeaway is that there are synergies between social protection and rural development. In Zambia, there are programs on irrigation, mechanization, and output marketing as well. And then there is need to continue with these programs. Then we got, finally, we got feedback from Professor Stephen, who said to us that there's need to be careful not to overload objectives. So when we have too many objectives, there's need to overload the programs and then we don't get the most out of it. There's need for social programs to also both social and economic programs to also target women who have been targeted mostly by social programs. Then Mr. Raymond ended with us by saying there are several efforts that are being done by the African Development Bank. And thank you very much. He also told us that they're developing a tool for integrating social protection in annual projects. And using a forum such as this, those lessons can be used to enhance the development of that tool. Thank you very much, Marion. I submit. Over.
Thank you very much. That is Dr. Alice Mutiti Mwetwa, the Executive Secretary at Forum. Very composed lady, like you all have seen. Thank you, Alice. We have surely come to the close of this. Tell me, dear Bintia, how about you come move a vote of thanks to our wonderful panelists and participants and allow us to log off after you. Bintia, Senior Policy Officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Marian, and thank you again for all our participants. We have really appreciated being with you here today, and we have heard all of the good recommendations. We would like to thank you, Excellencies, colleagues, participants. On behalf of FAO, I would really like to thank you for all your time and the rich discussions we have had during this session. A special thanks to RU Forum for their precious collaboration in organizing such a successful event. It has been a real pleasure working with the whole team, and we have really appreciated this time together. I also take this opportunity to reiterate our gratitude to IFAD for their valuable support in the generation of these informative studies. We hope in the spirit of the Rome-based agencies that such fruitful collaboration will continue to work together in supporting countries in order to achieve their goals on social protection. On a final note, FAO welcomes the appeal from the AU Commissioner, and we are committed to work closely with our partners to strengthening the linkages and synergies between national social protection, agri-food systems, climate change for poverty reduction, and structural rural transformation in Africa. We are sure to count on the engagement of all our partners to join us in responding to the appeal from the African Union. So we really look forward to having this dialogue again, and thank you all, and again, apologies for the overrun in the time, but I think it was due to the rich discussions that took place today. So thank you very much, everyone. Marian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bintia. Yes, we are through. We have come to the close. Our blessed participants, the recording is available. Keep in touch with us. If any of you didn't put down their details in the chat, please do so. We'd like to continue this discussion and to engage with you. From us to you, all the best. We are out of here.